Hello, everybody. Welcome and good health. I am Bill Hall, and last year we did a presentation on water sanitation and hygiene, the WASH program, and it seems to have made a big splash. Lots of feedback, lots of questions, and thousands of views of our YouTube video. But after watching 2021's many disasters around the country and reading about perennial droughts globally, we've done some additional research on preparedness topics and done some testing of our own local water resources. And we've decided to revisit the topic of water tonight. Of the preparedness topics that we've covered, water is by far the most important, highest priority for surviving in an extended emergency or disaster situation. It's also one that's generated an awful lot of questions about how much water, how to do it safely, when, where to store it. Tonight, these are some of the topics that we want to focus on. First, a quick review. Your body requires a constant intake of water in one form or another in order to replenish and stay healthy. Human bodies, you may remember from your high school science class, are 85 to 70% water. And if you fail to sustain this ratio, you will get dehydrated and you'll get sick. And fairly quickly, your body starts shutting down critical organs and you can die. Now, you can survive a couple of weeks without food, but not without water. Now, in our culture, we are used to consuming incredible amounts of inexpensive water, even in areas of drought. And this is what we're comfortable with and what we're used to. And a sudden change will be frightening if and when it happens. And the kinds of disasters that we are planning for, our urban supply of water is likely to be severely disrupted, perhaps for an extended period of time. And of course, this threatens, number one, your need for a regular supply of clean, drinkable water. Now, how much water do you need personally, and how much does your family need to survive, to stay healthy, to enable you to do the other things that are required to live? If you find yourself without water or a regular supply, what are your options? Well, so what's the big deal? Why do we think of this as such a priority for our community, and why now? Well, let's talk about vulnerabilities just a little bit first. Much of it is hidden. We don't pay much attention to how we get our water. Just call the water district and they hook you up to the system. What we don't think about is that the development of our urban communities has taken place, well, like this picture shows. Water and sewer lines have, for the most part, been installed underground, and typically in the same trench or tunnel, and then covered up. In a large earthquake, this can be a major vulnerability. If both of these pipes break underground, there will be cross-contamination and you will not have clean drinking water until it's fixed in the entire system. This picture shows what can happen. This is an actual shot of what was found after an earthquake in San Fernando in 1971. Notice the red arrows. There were breaks in both water and sewer pipes in the same tunnel. This invites cross-contamination of these two systems. The water in your tap is then no longer safe to drink. Now, because of this vulnerability, our emergency response agencies and utility companies recommend that you shut off your water main in your house in order to prevent contaminated water from getting into your system and to protect the water already in the pipes of your house from running out when they turn off the pressure. You do this right after the shaking stops. Now, water systems can be disrupted by earthquakes, but also hard freezes, major floods. Wow, think about Texas 2 years ago. No electricity or water for almost 2 weeks. Now, these kinds of events are happening more frequently. And if one hits Oregon, well, what does it mean at our neighborhood level? In a major earthquake, like the overdue Cascadia Subduction Quake, how long could water systems be disrupted and shut down? Well, this slide that I'm showing here comes from a joint study of our emergency response agencies a few years ago. And it shows the estimated time to restore basic services after the expected big quake. Cascadia is likely to be an 8 to 9 level seismic event which will last anywhere from 3 to 5 to 7 minutes, shaking and rolling the level ground, splitting roads, collapsing buildings, and violently smashing and breaking apart utility supply systems like water. Now, as you can see here, roads, electricity, and healthcare facilities will be severely impacted for a long time as well. But tonight, let's just focus on the water supply. They are predicting, you see on that red arrow, that for at least a month to anywhere up to a year, you will not have access to functioning toilets and faucets in your home. Well, that's a long time. Now, we should understand how our utilities companies and emergency management agencies plan to restore services. I can summarize. After having contacted all of our emergency planning agencies, city, county, utility, state, all of them say that while there is coordinated planning going on today in each of these agencies, it is clear that there are no neighborhood level distribution plans in place for a major disaster like this. Now, you got to understand that it's really hard to predict what our transportation infrastructure will look like in the event of a major earthquake or wildfire or flood. Roads and bridges will be down. So every one of these agencies has told us that it's imperative that people be prepared themselves to manage their own family's survival. Bottom line, their bottom line advice to us is that if a scenario like the Cascadia quake happens, you and your neighbors are very likely to be on your own for water supply for quite a long time. And they strongly recommend that you, me, all of us, keep a minimum of 2 weeks supply of drinking water available for emergency at all times. Okay, let's take a breath. We want to be ready. We want to plan ahead, and it can feel overwhelming. So let's bring it down to earth and do some practical planning. Let's start by quantifying the need and then figure out how much water you and your family need. Now, I have some startling and fun facts which might help explain why it's overwhelming. We in the United States consume incredible amounts of inexpensive water. Well, the United States Geological Survey says that Americans use 80 to 100 gallons of water per person per day. According to the National Environmental Education Foundation, the average Oregon resident uses 113 gallons of water per day, not counting watering the yard. Hard to believe? Well, actually, I checked my water and sewer bill, and it's actually true. And according to our utility companies, most of that 100 gallons a day per person is heavy use of the toilets and showers and baths. Well, at least we must be really clean, but we take it all for granted. We don't think about much where the water is coming from or where it goes after we use it. It runs through our faucets and showers and toilets at a prodigious rate, and it's hard to picture, well, for example, me personally saving 2 weeks of water at 100 gallons a day in one place. Let's see, 100 gallons times 14, that's 1,400 gallons in my garage. Whoa, I would have my own flood. All right, so let's break down our real needs and do some more workable water math. How much water do you really need to live? Not necessarily what you're using in our society today. Think survival. Think of what the Ukrainians are having to put up with right now. The U.S. National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine has determined that people need a minimum of 1 gallon of water per person and perhaps pet per day to stay healthy. A little more over half of that is for drinking in one form or another, and the rest is for washing and cooking, both vital for good health. Now, that's a lot less than 100 gallons, but it's a bare minimum for staying healthy. A gallon per person per day. And of course, don't forget Rover and Kitty. So we want to pause at this point and give the audience participants a chance to think about how this applies to each of you. How much do you think that you and your family need? How many pots of pasta do you cook in a week? How much coffee or tea? Let's take a few minutes to think about this. Write down what you and your family would need for an extended emergency, say 2 weeks or a month. Survival amounts. Keep in mind, no faucets, no toilets. Let me show you this. Let's use the FEMA and our emergency response agency requirements for a 2-week supply of drinkable water stored for emergencies. Now, here's how you calculate the number of gallons of water you're going to need in a major disaster. You can take a photo of this page, actually, so you can do this for your family and put water on your to-do list to start acquiring tomorrow. So let's do the math. I'm going to use a family of 4 just as an example. If you multiply 4 by 14 days, then we get 56 gallons of water at a gallon per person per day. And maybe your family likes pasta and rice a lot. So I'll estimate 4 or 5 batches of rice and noodles over the 2 weeks, plus a little extra for pets, in addition to the basic gallon per person. So that makes a total 60 gallons of water you're going to need to store. Well, actually, that's a number that we can work with. But even 60 gallons, let's not be complacent. 60 gallons is a storage challenge. Remember that when a disaster hits, you're not going to be in planning mode. You're going to be in the thick of it, taking care of family and home. And it's highly unlikely, maybe impossible, for you to be able to drive to the store and get your 30 to 60 gallons. Fire hydrants are going to be shut off. That's not a source. And your neighbors are all going to be in the same boat. Sorry for the pun. And probably won't have enough for both their family and yours. So we need a plan A for your family. Emergency plan A should be to have enough potable water stored so that you can take care of yourself and your family while you are in the throes of the early stages of a protracted disaster. So you won't have to worry about where the heck are we going to get water to drink while you're taking care of your family and adjusting to the huge changes in everything else. Okay, plan A. How do you store 60 gallons of drinking water? Well, already safe water can come in 3 different forms. First is pre-bottled water. You can buy cases of bottled water at the grocery store. A case of bottled water is about 3 gallons, and it costs around $6. It would take 20 of these to store 60 gallons. Now, you could also buy pre-bottled water in large containers like these. Costco has 5-gallon bottled water for $10 to $12 each. This would mean around $100 for 60 gallons, and you would need 10 to 11 of these to store that much. Can you lift 40 pounds? That's how much these handsome jugs weigh each. Now, note that plastic containers should not be stored directly on concrete or on the ground. Concrete attracts fluids and it actually bleeds, and any chemicals that have been on that concrete could, in fact, find its way into your plastic water containers, including hazardous materials like, say, gasoline or oils. It's usually not enough to make it toxic, but it's sure going to taint the water enough to make it taste awful. And no amount of pouring it from container to container would take that taste away. So put cardboard or wood or a tarp in between the jugs or the cases and the floor. So how long does pre-bottled water last? It actually can be used indefinitely if stored properly. It's recommended that shelf life of bottled water is no more than 2 years for non-carbonated water and 1 year for sparkling water. Can you store water if you don't want to buy it pre-bottled? Yes, you can store water from your tap at home in a variety of food-safe jug sizes. It's not particularly safe to use jugs and bottles that previously had milk or juice in them because the lids are not robust and because bacteria can grow pretty quickly in these, even if you clean them. Some juice jugs might be okay. You should research the type of plastic used. If it's PET, you're probably okay. You can also buy food-grade storage containers at the grocery store or places like REI or online. They come in a variety of shapes and sizes. We were able to get stackable 3.5 and 5-gallon storage bricks, as you can see here, for about $15 to $30 each. The smaller bricks are easier to pick up. They weigh about 25 pounds and can be stored under beds or other tight locations. Again, you would need 18 3.5-gallon jugs or 12 5-gallon jugs to store 2 weeks of water for a family of 4. We also, incidentally, bought food grade 55-gallon barrels. We cleaned and disinfected them and stored them outside, covered on a wooden pallet out of the sun. Now, one of these 55-gallon barrels would hold a 2-week supply of water for a family of 4. It's an efficient way to store water, but keep in mind that these things, when you fill them up, they weigh about 500 pounds. You're not going to be carrying those, so you should locate and secure the site and the barrel before filling it up. Keep in mind also that you should only use food grade hoses if you fill them up outside. Garden hose water isn't safe, and it really tastes bad. Now, when filling containers with tap water that you plan to store for a long time, you need to be very careful to disinfect the hose bibs, the faucets, and the spigots, and anything that touches the water that you're putting in your containers. Use bleach or rubbing alcohol for cleansing these areas. Now, to clean the containers themselves, simply rinse with bleach and let them dry. Disinfect the lids, add the water, and unscented bleach to preserve the water. The amount of bleach that you use depends on the volume of water. And just in case, remember that stored tap water should be recycled once or twice a year, just in case there's been bacterial growth. So date them and use the recycled water on the garden or to wash the car, and then you can re-disinfect and refill your containers. Even if you don't do this on a regular schedule, this water is actually always going to be easier to treat and make drinkable than water from the outside. Now, a third possible source of clean water after a disaster is the municipal water already in your pipes at home and in your bathtub and your hot water heater once you've shut off the water main. Now, these can be captured at the time of a disaster if you get the water main turned off and learn how to access that water. And in a disaster like an earthquake that may contaminate your water supply, number one, shut your water off to protect the water you've already got. And once you've done that, the water in your pipes should be safe, and you can access it from the lowest point in your house. Some people buy something called a water bob. It's a kind of a bladder that you can put in your bathtub, sort of lines the tub and store water. It's a really good quantity of water, but it's not clear how much time you have to fill it up before you turn off the water main. But you can try that. You can find a water bob on the Survival Cache site, included on our list of websites that we're sending to. Now, if you have a tank water heater, you can also count this water as part of your emergency supply, typically, between 30 and 50 gallons of water. Now, you want to make sure that you have a food grade hose and a clean bucket. It's also a good idea to drain your water from your tank annually to reduce the sediment that gathers there from the water. This practice is also good for other reasons, including preserving the lifetime of your water heater and getting practice on draining the water tank, which come in handy in a disaster. Now, sediments can build up in the water heater in an emergency, and if that's the case, you may want to filter the water, but it's pretty much clean. Do not use water from your swimming pool or your hot tub for drinking. These have a strong mix of chemicals that can be toxic. The swallow isn't going to hurt you, as those of you who spent any time in swimming pools have found out. But drinking any quantity of this water can be actually quite dangerous. Regionalh2o.org has a webpage included on our list on how to find water in your house, including a great video on how to drain your tank to access the water. Now, there are some smaller sources of liquid that you could use in a dire emergency. For example, ice cubes made from uncontaminated water, commercially bottled beverages, and canned fruits. But a couple notes on that. Number one, don't consume any beverages or canned food from containers that have been submerged in flood water. You never know where that flood has been and how much is able to seep into your containers. Secondly, be aware that caffeinated or alcoholic drinks, you can store those, but they can cause dehydration. And so drinking them will just make you need more water. You can acquire water, and now you have to decide where to store it. Now, it's best to store emergency water in cool, dark places. You can store water under beds, in closets, and in the trunk of your car, in addition to the garage and yard if it's shaded from the sun. Keep your clean emergency water away from any toxic chemicals, like in your garage, like, say, household cleaners. And don't put your water up on high shelves if you can avoid it, because a big quake just might toss them off and burst your containers on the floor. And as mentioned before, it's not a good idea to store plastic containers on a concrete floor directly, because there can be a chemical reaction over time between the plastic and the concrete. So if you store your containers in the garage, you need something underneath those containers so they don't touch the concrete. Now, if you store your water outside, be sure to elevate it off the ground on a pallet, for example. Store it in the shade or under a tarp in a secure area. That's what we're doing with our 55-gallon barrels that I mentioned earlier. Now, also remember that it's possible to introduce contaminants like bacteria when you are filling and refilling tap water storage containers. So you need to make sure that all hoses, lids, and spigots are cleaned with alcohol or bleach if and when you are going to fill them up again. So that's plan A. It is quite honestly the most important, highest priority preparedness action that you can take today in preparation for an emergency. You don't have to do it all at once. Just get started. Buy a case of water at the grocery store tomorrow and another one a week from now. Order a couple of food grade containers and figure out where you want to store them. Then change your mind after they arrive. Just don't let the challenge or the inconvenience of getting started mean that you end up getting caught flat-footed without emergency water supplies when the disaster suddenly hits. That is plan A. Okay, well, nobody's perfect. And as Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. I believe in always have a plan B just in case. What happens if disaster hits and you haven't stored enough water, or the shutdown goes on past your 2-week supply? It's a good idea to have a plan B. If you're out of drinkable water and the system is still down and the National Guard isn't yet distributing water to neighborhoods and the family is, well, really thirsty, at that point, you may need to look outside your own resources inside and get water that's available outside your home. Plan B is knowing where to find that water, how to acquire it, and how to treat the water in order to make it safe to drink. Now, obviously, you should be listening to radio and social media to see if and when government agencies are going to be starting to deliver water to the neighborhood or the community, and have those storage containers that you did have ready for collecting it at the distribution stations when and if they're available. But if there are no emergency delivery sites, where do you look for water? Well, you may have some ideas on that. In a dire situation like I described, where would you go for an adequate supply of water for your family? Remember, 1 gallon a day per person. Let's start with the water sources that you should avoid. Do not drink or use for sanitation flood water. Never do that. That flood water goes through all kinds of areas and picks up really nasty stuff. Do not drink or use for sanitation water that has floating materials in it or has an unusual odor or color. Water that you know is suspect or might be contaminated with fuel or heavy metals or toxic chemicals. If you suspect or know that the water is contaminated, it cannot be made safe. So a different source of water needs to be found. Stay away from and don't come in contact with water that smells bad or looks discolored or has foam or scum or algae mats on it, or paint-like streaks on the surface, or it has dead fish or other animals washed up on the shore or the beach. So plan now. Where will you go for water if this situation happens in your neighborhood? Well, You might actually be tempted to think, as some people said, that your hot tub or pool is a good source of drinking water, but it's not. It's not a good idea. All of the experts say because the chemicals and human skin cells and other contaminants in this water make it unsafe for consumption. This also goes for water in your toilet tank, a water feature in the yard, or a water bed. And these sources can be used for sanitation, such as flushing toilets or maybe washing dishes, but not for drinking. There are really only three sources of water for survival, other than what you've already got stored. And these sources of water are all going to require treatment before they're drinkable. Number one, somebody mentioned rain. Yes, you can install rain barrels for a good source of free water. But if it comes from your roof, remember what the birds do up there and the squirrels, it's going to need treatment to make it safe to drink. And we have a video on how to create a rain barrel catchment device that you can check out. It's included on the handout that we sent you. Secondly, there are lakes and ponds. And of course, in Cedar Hills, we have Commonwealth Lake and ponds in our areas. Now, limited by the guidelines that I've already mentioned, these could be sources of water to be treated to make them drinkable. And we'll talk about treatments later. And then third source is streams. We do have a number of streams and creeks in the Beaverton area, which can vary in volume as weather changes. Johnson Creek and Beaverton Creek are actually running pretty full right now. Experts indicate running water is always a better bet than stagnant water as sources for raw water to treat. But local streams are not safe to drink without significant treatment. Well, water everywhere and not a drop to drink. A ton of dirty water. So once you know where it is and how you can acquire it, how do we treat this water to make it safe to drink? And after you do treat it, how do you know that it's really safe and ready for the family to drink? We've been studying that, and now I'm going to turn this over to my partner, Karen, running all, to talk about treating water and describe our attempts to turn water from Johnson Creek into potable, drinkable water.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Where do we start with making water drinkable? You've seen water in Commonwealth Lake and the local streams, and it's not something anyone should consume in its raw state. So what does treating water mean? This chart shows how the professionals treat our water. It includes multiple steps. They remove the big stuff in the early stages, and then they filter out the smaller stuff. And finally, they disinfect the water to kill the microscopic bad bugs that slip through the filters. We'll have to learn how to replicate these three steps to make potable water. And it's actually not as complicated as it sounds, but you need some tools and information on how to do it. So why purify water? Well, I think y'all know what the reason is. Just to emphasize that water from the environment that looks clean, even after filtering, is not necessarily safe to drink. There are bad bugs, parasites, bacteria, viruses that you want to make sure to remove with filtration and disinfection. And they look kind of cool in this lovely microscopic photos, and they may even have catchy names like Campylobacter and Cryptosporidium. But you don't want these bad actors in your water or in your body, and they're going to make you really sick if they are in there, and you'll want to drink more water, which is not a good situation when access to clean water is limited. So this photo shows you 4 of the most common waterborne pathogens in our water systems. These biological contaminants need treatment beyond filtering because of their microscopic size. They may slip right through many of the filters, even the top-rated microfilters. So disinfection is very important. And these are the 2 steps that you should be, that are really important. Filtration gets rid of the big stuff, and most of the smaller stuff, such as parasites and inorganic impurities, things like arsenics, nitrates, and heavy metals. Disinfection kills disease-causing bugs. There are multiple methods for disinfection with varying degrees of efficacy. 2 of the simplest methods are shown above. If you have the fuel, boiling is the most effective way to kill all of the bugs. Bleach kills most of the bugs if used in the right quantities. For both methods, you want to combine with Filtration, and the CDC has very specific instructions on these, and the link will be in the handout that we have sent to you. So let's talk about filtration systems, starting with personal water filter systems, like the one shown on the screen. If you run out of water and you're on your way home or you're just away, you'll need to collect water and treat it by filtering it through a microfilter. Hopefully you'll have some store of water in your car, and your filter system would be a second backup plan. Small personal filters like these, like the Life Straw, can be used in emergency for one person. There are microfilters available on the market that remove over 99% of contaminants, and these can range in price from $20 to $70. Check REI, Dick's, Cabela's, and there's lots of options on the internet. In a dire emergency, you can usually stick this into a stream and get a fairly quick drink, but we want to caution you on this. This way of consuming water is risky, and your stored water supply of clean water is always going to be safer than a personal filter. One note of caution: if you're using a personal water filter, don't let it freeze. Under freezing conditions, the water in the filter expands and renders the filter useless. A friend of mine says that she puts her filter in her sleeping bag at night when she's out backpacking in cold weather. It's not as good as sleeping with a cat, but it saves her water filter. These are great devices for camping and in your go bag, but it's not going to solve the water supply challenge for your family. It's always a good idea to travel with a couple of gallons of emergency water in your car, because it's going to be your safest water. All right. The larger capacity filter systems that we have showing here can serve a whole family's needs. Some of these, like the one on the left and right, cost a few $100s and will last you for the duration of an extended outage. The capacity depends on the one you buy. Berkey and Katadyn are trusted brands, and you can find these on the internet. We don't endorse any particular brands. The middle one, the 2-bucket do-it-yourself system shown here, is a much less expensive alternative, and it's highly recommended by emergency services organizations. It includes a ceramic microfilter shown here to the left of the bottom bucket, which is inserted in for use. They're long-lasting. The filters will last as much as a year or several hundred uses before it needs replacement. And these filters can be cleaned somewhat if they're used over a longer period of time. I would caution not to clean them too often because it can damage the filter. Whatever filtration system you use, we recommend that you purchase extra backup filters just in case one breaks. Ceramic ones can actually be very fragile, and I've broken one by accidentally dropping it. When shopping for a water filter, be aware that not all water filters are created equal. Pay attention to the pore size. Think of a strainer or a colander. The smaller the pores, the better the filter, the more contaminants the filter will remove. Look for a filter that has a 0.2 micron pore size or smaller. It'll filter out 99% of the pathogens. And as you can see, some of the viruses will just slip right through it. They're really tiny, and they're just going to go right through those filters. Disinfection is required to get those guys. Check out the CDC website for a more detailed explanation than we have time here. The 2-bucket system is worth spending some more time on because it's cheap, easy to assemble, and can generate 15 to 50 gallons of drinkable water a day if set up right. Our direct experience is that the flow rate is more like a gallon per hour, but this is still plenty for a large family's needs for an extended period. All you need to do is keep that top bucket filled with water from your raw source. Many emergency experts recommend this 2-bucket system, but does this system actually work? And we decided to put this to the test. This was fun. Using water from our local sources. In our first test, Barbara Bracken and her Tualatin Ready CERT group sampled water from the Tualatin River in an area they envisioned would be their primary source of raw water in a disaster. They bottled the water after running it through the filter and sent it to Alexan Analytical Labs, which is located in Tigard, for testing. The results showed that The filtration system was effective in removing the non-biological contaminants. Yay, success on that. But it still showed that some microscopic coliforms were in the water, which means that the water might still be unsafe to drink. So the presence of coliform bacteria in water means that there is a risk that pathogens also could be present in the water. Not all bacteria is dangerous, but it's just an indicator. So Tualatin Ready repeated the test and this time added disinfection step to the filtered water. They chose the recommended method for large quantities of water, liquid bleach. They added 8 drops, 1/8 of a teaspoon to 5% to 6% unscented household bleach to a gallon of the filtered water and sent that sample back to the lab. Anytime you use liquid bleach, be sure it's fresh, less than 6 months old, with no thickeners, additives, or scents. The problem with household bleach is that it has a shelf life of only about 6 months. As time passes, the chlorine level decreases and it's just less effective. Frequent rotation is critical for bleach to be effective in killing pathogens. So what happened? It was a big surprise. What were the results? They came back showing that the treated water still had coliforms in it. So that was really puzzling and disappointing. Defeat was not an option. We still need to figure this out. So we wanted to find out why Tualatin Ready got these results and also investigate ways that we could do a better job. So what are the other methods of disinfecting water? There are a number of different methods, and we'd be here all night if I went through every single one of them. Most important thing to remember is that you need to combine filtration and disinfection to get the purest water. So as I mentioned before, the tried and true method is boil the water for 1 to 3 minutes, after you filter it. And it doesn't remove all the inorganics, which is why you need to filter it. The drawback to boiling water in the long term is that it uses up fuel that you might need for cooking or heating, and you're limited to quantities that you can boil at a time. Another disinfection method is UV light from the sun. That can kill the bugs pretty well too. The water has to be filtered first because radiation needs to have a clear path to all of the water. The drawbacks are that it's weather dependent and it takes 8 to 12 hours of the sun to be effective. There are UV flashlights, but they are small and can only be used in small amounts of water at a time. They also require some kind of power. Hikers often will do one of these dairy pin type things, and it's effective for small quantities. Tincture of iodine or Camphor's iodine tablets can disinfect the water in the right concentrations, but iodine is not always effective against parasites. Again, you can filter out those parasites using a water filter method, so combine the two. And finally, in addition to bleach, there are actually powdered or tablet chlorine treatment methods that can be effective. We are all familiar with that in our pools or tubs or tap water. The advantage of these treatment methods are that you can treat large amounts of water at once. Again, you need a microfilter to filter that water first to remove the inorganic material from the water and disinfect it with the chlorine treatment afterwards. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this when we go through the testing procedure, which took a slight different twist from what the Tualatin Ready approach was. So what did we learn from what the Tualatin River test results? And why didn't the treatments with bleach work? Here are some possibilities. Bleach is known to kill some, but not all types of disease-causing organisms that may be in the water. It's also possible that the concentration of bleach used was not enough to kill the germs in the water. CDC guidelines suggest doubling the dosage if the water is cloudy, murky, colored, or very cold. It's a judgment call. So maybe this water needed a higher concentration of bleach to kill everything. How could we know for sure? Perhaps the bleach was too old. Probably not, since Barbara had recently purchased the bleach, but who knows how long it was on the shelf. And finally, it's also possible that the Tualatin folks may have collected water from an unusually polluted spot on the Tualatin River, downstream from agricultural areas. And if that was the case, that collection spot would not be a good trusted source for water in an emergency. So what we learned was where you collect the raw water matters. Testing is a good idea to find out what works in your neighborhood. Effective water treatment requires several steps, and you may need to simply boil your water after treating it. This also emphasized the importance of plan A for us. Store lots of potable water. I'm serious, we went out and bought like a whole bunch of 55-gallon barrels to store water and sold those to our friends at cost. And yeah, so we have a lot of water on hand now. We decided to replicate the water tests with water collected in our Cedar Hills area to see if we got some different results. We decided to do a couple of different additional treatment methods. This picture shows our first scene of what could have been an award-winning funniest home video as Bill literally nearly fell into the water in the creek down the bank. And in spite of the risks to Bill, we chose Johnson Creek over Commonwealth Lake as a source to test the water because experts tell us that moving water is a better source than stagnant water. Besides testing the raw water, the 3 treatment options we chose are shown on this slide. We'll discuss each one of these in the next few slides. We sent the samples to the same professional lab, Alexa Analytical, and we also ran tests using an inexpensive kit that you can purchase for home use. Our first method, 2-bucket filtration system alone. This is a repeat of the test that Barbara ran, except that we are using our source water from Johnson Creek instead of the Tualatin River. We constructed our 2-bucket gravity filtration system in about 30 minutes. As you can see on the slide, we added a tube to increase the water flow. We pre-filtered the water through a terry cloth towel into the top bucket of the filtration system to remove visible particles before microfiltering. This pre-filtration step will extend the life of your filter, and you can use other materials for that pre-filtration, including clean cheesecloth, coffee filters, or paper towels. Then we waited for the water to drip through the filter from the top bucket into the lower bucket. We clocked that around 1 gallon an hour. And before collecting the sample, we ran 1 gallon through the filter just to flush out any potential dust particles from the activated charcoal in the filter. So that was our first test experiment. Our second test case is the filtration plus disinfection. And this is similar to Barbara's second test, except that we made up our own bleach solution. We used a chemical which is used to boost bleach levels in swimming pools and hot tubs. We chose to make up a fresh batch of bleach using calcium hypochlorite. That's a big word, but it's also commonly known as pool shock. You can see it here labeled as dry tech. And it's found in a powdered or granulated form and has usable shelf life of 10 years, which is a huge advantage over liquid bleach. You just add water in the right quantity to make a fresh chlorine bleach solution. And this is a powerful chemical. Be sure to handle and store this carefully if you choose this method. Follow the manufacturer's instructions. I wore a mask and eye protection for safety when mixing it up outside. And I put a bag within a plastic container to keep it dry for storage. Just so you know that a homemade bleach solution weakens at a similar rate as a regular household bleach over about 6 months. So it's best to mix up a fresh batch each time you treat a quantity of water with this method. The last treatment method, this was fun. Our third treatment method is called P&G Purifier of Water. It was developed in collaboration with the CDC and the World Health Organization and is used widely in developing countries as a way to produce clean water. This packet includes powdered ferric sulfate, which causes inorganic solids and dissolved chemicals to clump together and then settle down, which means that we didn't have to filter the water before using the packet in the bucket of raw water. After the clumping and settling, calcium hypochlorite disinfects the clean water, and the World Health Organization classifies it as a comprehensive protection because it reduces the bad bugs and also removes metals and chemicals. So while the Cedar Hills Ready doesn't endorse any brands, I have to admit that this method was easy, fast, and kind of fun. Instead of waiting for hours for the water to filter, PUR can treat 2.5 gallons of water in about 30 minutes. It's seriously fun to watch that coagulation process, settling the solids to the bottom, turning yucky brown turbid water into clear water. And as you can see that after we decanted the water into the container in the bottom pictures there, that's what it looked like. It was really clear. And yes, I'll tell you whether we drank it or not later. So how did we test it? I'm going to go over this really quickly. We used the lab, as I already mentioned. We also used some home kits. The labs were pretty expensive, $175 for the full series of tests, and the home kits ran between $15 and $35. What we wanted to do was compare home kits against the lab and see if there were any brands that we would trust. So what are the results? Okay, as expected, the home test confirmed that the raw water was contaminated with all kinds of bad stuff. The home kit that we found actually replicated the results of the lab was this one called Health Metric Bacteria Test, and the logo is right there at the bottom of the slide with those little water bottles that show the results there. Purple means good. Our lab test results showed that the filtration alone filtered out some of the bacteria, but not all of it. Same result as the Tualatin River test. Our conclusion from this is that filtration is an important first step, but for drinking water, disinfection is also needed to kill out the bad bugs. Both the filtration and the PUR methods worked. You can't believe how happy we were about that. All of the tests showed no E. coli, no coliform, no bad chemicals, etc., that we would be worried about. So this was a very useful process to go through, and we have refined our recommended emergency water strategy accordingly. Okay, Bill, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Water is everything. It's the basis for good health, good eating, and living a reasonable life while recovering from a disaster. I want to summarize our observations and recommendations. Number one, have a plan A and get started. Store at least 2 weeks of water for emergencies. Start accumulating those supplies now. Number two, then put together a plan B. Identify the low potential sources of raw water in your area and make a plan to collect and treat the water from either creeks or a lake or rainwater. Pre-filter and then filter your raw water from the environment with a high quality microfilter designed to produce enough water for you and your family's needs. And we recommend the 2-bucket system, but whatever you choose, put it together and have it on hand. Have a kit for disinfecting water to make it safe to drink. We recommend either calcium hypochlorite, like the Drytech product that Karen talked about, or packets of the Procter & Gamble PUR system, both of which are available on the internet. And then finally, have a high-quality test kit on hand to reassure yourself that you've successfully treated your water and made it safe. Don't wait. Don't run the risk of being without good water. Start putting together your stored water now. Be prepared. Practice what you will do when a disaster hits, so that when you are ready. We have numerous resources for you to freely download, including our Get Prepared Now booklet. It includes forms, checkoff sheets, a calendar of recommended purchases and activities, so that you don't get overwhelmed in the process of getting prepared. Check out the links shown on this page. And remember, knowledge means confidence, and planning plus preparedness means resilience for our neighborhoods and your family. Thank you for your attention and your patience and your great ideas. I hope you'll share this information with your family and your friends and your neighbors.
Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, click on the like button, or better yet, subscribe to our channel. Check out another one of our videos and let us know in the comments any questions or tips you may have. Be safe.